Gather round, children, gather round. We've looked back on the good old days of Ubisoft. We've witnessed the golden age. And we've faced the years that changed the way we thought about Ubisoft forever. But now, like all great things, when there is a rise to greatness, there is an inevitable downfall.
After 2014, gamers' opinions of the French developer Ubisoft had shifted from a respected and trustworthy studio, known for their consistent level of quality, if not a little formulaic, to now a developer to keep an eye on, and not in a good way. Although in retrospect, I believe the games released in that fateful year of the Expendables 3 were overall pretty decent, but at the time, Assassin's Creed Unity, Watch Dogs, and Far Cry 3.5 were either broken, downgraded, or just very lazy, leading a change in overall public perception of Ubisoft. From 2015
Say that again?
to 2020, Ubisoft would go on to release around 45 games during this period, ranging from Hail Marys to inject new life into their old and tired franchises, like when they just got Just Dance and they made another one, to creating new IPs altogether. This period is an interesting section of Ubisoft's timeline, as we watch a company who are held in such high regard begin to take a step further and further away from making games that people enjoy to making games that people need to spend money on.
When we were activated, we knew the situation was bad, worse than anyone knew. We are an elite, highly skilled group of embedded agents. They only call us when everything else has failed. We have no rules. We have no limits. Our job is to protect what remains.
We are your co-workers. We are your neighbors. We might even be your friends.
But when we get the call,
We leave everything behind.
we are
The Division.
Developed by the Ubisoft studio Massive in 2016, The Division was another one of Ubisoft's properties that had an insane level of hype surrounding it. Similar to Watch Dogs, the E3 presentations shown to gamers absolutely blew everyone away, from its impressive cinematics to its jaw-dropping visual design and setting, although the showcases were very cringe at parts.
Dude, check out Manhattan.
But overall, The Division was shaping up to be a slam dunk for Ubisoft, and after the tragedy of 2014's big releases, Ubisoft really needed a win to reshape the public perspective of the company, to restore some faith, if you will. However, things didn't go over so nicely. The issues were almost identical to that of the first Watch Dogs only 2 years prior. There was once again a large controversy around the graphical downgrade gamers noticed from its shiny E3 trailers compared to the final release. But it wasn't just that. Being an online-only game, there was a plethora of server issues, bugs, holding people back from actually playing the game that they paid for. Tie that with a very repetitive gameplay loop, unsatisfying bullet-spongy enemies, and a lack of endgame content on a release, as well as a damning 6.7 from IGN when they still had some skin in the reviewing game. The Division was not the Outbreak success / Destiny killer that Ubisoft and gamers hoped for. After a deadly virus called the Dollar Flu spreads through New York via contaminated cash on America's favorite holiday, Black Friday, the Big Apple turns rotten. You get it? The government then activates the Division, a secret sleeper agent organization in an attempt to restore order to a crumbling city. When the first wave of agents is deployed to support the Joint Task Force, they go AWOL, forcing the deployment of a second wave, which includes the player. And after the aircraft transporting the second wave is shot down, the agent must reconvene with the others, establish a base of operations, and take back the city from the various factions who have taken control. investigate the virus's origins, and hunt down the rogue agents delivering some lead to their skulls. I mean, a lot of lead. Like 4 mags worth. At least. Saying you played The Division for the plot is like saying you watched Fast and Furious for the deep philosophical questions it poses, such as why does Brian O'Connor actually like the tuna here?
I like the tuna here. Bullshit, asshole. No one likes the tuna here.
Yes, there is a plot. There is a story. And at the time I drew a lot of similarities to Destiny 1. Things do happen. People do speak about those things. There is a beginning. There is a middle somewhere. And then there is an ending. But can I tell you about any of the characters, their motivations, what makes them tick? No, I couldn't. It's got a really interesting, well, it's interesting enough setup with the virus outbreak and the city in chaos, you know, fighting your way through an extremely beautiful and snowy New York City. But the story just isn't really the focus here. Well, at least I hope it wasn't. It's just got a lot of flat characters, and the missions are designed to be replayed over and over again instead of drive home a good narrative. There are glimmers of intrigue, however. It has just such an incredible atmosphere, and combined with some pretty interesting world building in some of its Echo side missions, where it's sort of like, you have like Batman Arkham Detective Vision, where you can sort of just piece things together. That's interesting. It's all visually just very well designed. But instead, they just wanted to chase more popular trends. But really, this game's story is just built for you to have an excuse to shoot absolutely everyone on sight. And that's where the real steak and ale filling is to this pie. Now I kind of want a pie. So the story is lackluster and only acts as a very small justification for what the game is really about, and that's guns. Lots of guns. So The Division is divided into 3 main parts. We have the campaign, the endgame content, and of course the Dark Zone. The campaign is where you do story missions, such as kill this guy, find that thing, and also defend that thing.
Alert. Hostiles detected nearby.
Very standard looter-shooter stuff, nothing to really write home about, but it's all elevated by its setting as well as the overall mission design. You'll be fighting through snowy streets, destroyed hospitals, rooftops, and even some of the Big Apple's famous locations like Times Square and Grand Central Station. The campaign acts as more of an avenue to learn how to play, upgrade your arsenal of weapons and armor while unlocking new skills and talents through upgrading the base of operations. It's fun enough. I actually had the most fun in this area, I think. The actual missions themselves are quite entertaining. I was quite surprised. Some do feel very samey, but there are some real standouts. Like there was one particular mission where you're fighting through like really close quarters, destroyed office blocks, and it's just you're getting constantly flanked by the enemy. And it's because normally you're like fighting out on the streets, so it's a lot more sort of long range. You got to pick them off one by one. But in this area specifically, you were so closed in, and you really had to adapt to what the enemies were doing. And thankfully you are constantly getting loot drops to boost that dopamine, so you can test out all the different weapon archetypes, which you can then sort of build towards the ones which you most like. The weapons aren't exactly crazy. You've just got your standard assault rifles, light machine guns, SMGs, marksman rifles, sniper rifles, and shotguns, and obviously pistols. All do feel good to shoot and handle well. There is a plethora of attachments you obtain throughout the grinding as well, or you can even buy them at the various the vendors at the safe houses to then enhance your weapons even further. All the gear has these sort of tiers, and it has like a lovely little beacon whenever it drops. So you're like, but you have like the standard grey, which will be the common gear, which will be anything from like ammo, consumables, or when you're like low level, that's what the weapons look like. Then you have uncommon, which is green, blue, which is then rare, and then you have, I think purple is then epic, I think that's what it's called.
Now, this is epic.
And then you have the yellow, which is the legendary stuff. And then once you sort of breach into the end game, you then start finding green stuff, which is, well, it's a different shade of green. Where those are like the sets, but we'll get into that later. But honestly, the game was no cakewalk. I really wasn't expecting this. You really have to play somewhat tactically and not just run around like a headless chicken like you may do when other looter shooters. You do feel quite underpowered. You do die in only a few shots in some instances, and even though you are stacked up in body armor, the average New York hustler in a beanie with a pistol can spray you down in just one mag. And that just makes the encounters feel intense, you know, knowing that you're only one bad decision away from crying for your friend to come revive you. It was very fun, if not a little frustrating in some instances where we died a lot. And I mean a lot. But once you follow through the very thin narrative that strings these missions together, you reach the level 30 cap and the endgame then commences. And to be honest, I was pretty disappointed with the amount or the lack of content that was here. Well, at least the content which wasn't attached to paid DLC. So I intended to play through the endgame content with two of my friends. I personally was really looking forward to like some of the stuff that they might have had. I was anticipating there to be like a fair bit to work through from memory, because I did play the Division 1 many years ago. But I was just stunned by the severe lack of it. Which is when I went back and I did a bit of research into it, and then I found out that the game was heavily criticised at the time for the lack of endgame content, as Ubisoft believed that the Dark Zone as well as the daily and weekly challenges would just be enough for everyone to sweat through. And although the Dark Zone was great, and we'll obviously talk about it later, it just wasn't enough to satisfy at this time, especially when you had Destiny 1 which was still active. The Division was directly competing with Destiny 1. You had a game which had 2 years of expansions and a player base that had already been built up for players to grind through, and you know, I believe the Division's just not putting enough effort into the endgame. There was just a massive oversight on their end, and it really damaged the longevity of the game, which these sorts of live service games live and die on. Over the years, Ubisoft did add more stuff to do by adding incursions, which are basically like Destiny's raids, and then there's world tiers, which allows you to increase the level of the enemies on the entire map, and also several expansions. However, if you were stuck with the base game like my friends were, you could only really rerun story missions on harder difficulties, play the many encounters which are just copy and pasted around the map with stronger enemies, or go through the Dark Zone. So, not a lot really. We played through a few of the sort of like the special story missions on hard, and yeah, it was fun. The way that they've increased the difficulty isn't like just the standard bullshit sort of, oh, now they just take more bullets to kill. It's more they have different, like, various kits, like they're using the Division, your agent's abilities. Like there was this one enemy that can use the health station, and you just keep putting it down, and if you didn't kill that health station, there's no chance you're killing any of the enemies around him, so you have to prioritize that target. And that sort of loop itself, where you have to sort of counter what the other enemies are using rather than just dump more mags into it, did make for quite a fun experience. My apologies to comparing this game to Destiny all the time, but when Destiny had what they called sort of, I think they were heroic story missions, which were the same concept, but they were many different variables added to keep the missions fresh. You know, there was various buffs or debuffs, such as a certain weapon archetype has more damage, or you're more vulnerable to a certain damage type, you take more damage when you're airborne, you know, lots of different sort of buffs and debuffs. You know, these sort of gameplay changes can make the grinding feel just more fresh and challenging as well, but instead you just have to fight more bullet spongy enemies on the same missions you've already done before, so there's just not a lot of excitement there. we did try an incursion, but we got absolutely battered, mainly because you are supposed to have sort of good builds and team cohesion, which we did not. We had no idea what we were doing. However, I can see how they would have been really fun. The small snippet that we managed to get through in one of the incursions was just incredibly challenging, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun. Although my friends couldn't play the DLC, I tried playing bits of them to see what they were like, and yeah, they were quite good. So my favorite DLC was the Underground expansion. I think that specifically was great. Adding like procedurally generated dungeons beneath the city, adding modifiers and enemy factions to keep the runs feeling varied. You know, this was great. It's just a shame that something so replayable was locked behind a paywall. I had the same sentiment towards the next expansion, Survival, where you are dropped into like a sort of like a blizzard, starting with minimal gear, and you have to scavenge for supplies. You have to fight hunger and the cold, and then try to extract with the gear that you obtain. This again was great. It was really great. However, locking again this behind a paywall when the endgame content is dying for some variety, it just doesn't sit right with me. I didn't manage to play the final expansion, Last Stand, as it was more PvP focused, as most players have moved on to Division 2 by now, apart from the hackers. Then the final part of the Division is perhaps its best part, most challenging part, definitely, and that's the Dark Zone. The Dark Zone was heavily focused on during the marketing being the PvP zone of this MMORPG, or so they called it. With some of the best loot out there, players enter the Dark Zone through checkpoints, explore to find loot, kill bosses who drop loot, and attempt to extract with that loot at an extraction point. This is where you sort of shoot up a flare and you have to hold out. But now, enemy AI flock to your location and try to kill you as well as other players. And to be honest, yeah, it's very hard. It's potentially just a skill issue, but several times I got absolutely destroyed by players. There was one checkpoint where they were just camping out there, and I just couldn't get out, so I had to like move to a different checkpoint. But you know, that should tell you about the kind of player that you'll be dealing with. One of those players I'm like 99% sure was a hacker, as he just one-shot me from cover without even peeking. I know we always be like, oh my god, he's hacking, but genuinely, that was the most egregious hacking I've seen in a long time. So if you do pick this up, be warned. You know, it's not it's not what it used to be, I suppose. I also did some post-game grinding, so I got locked out with playing with my friends as my gear was too high level, and you can't just sort of like unequip gear to then go to their level. So yeah, I was just locked out with playing with my friends, which is a good thing when balancing to make the Dark Zone fair, but it meant I had to solo run it, and to be honest, I'm not that good. So I didn't even extract with any loot, so okay, I'm sorry, I'm not good. Although the servers aren't as populated as they used to be, this part of the game is still incredibly fun at parts. You know, as an unfortunate fan of Escape from Tarkov, I really like the extraction shooter DNA here. With the Division's cohesive gameplay and the looter shooter mechanics, it all just meshes together very well to make quite a nice package. Enemies in this zone are hard, and I mean very hard. You know, very rarely having that standard red health bar you can expect in the other areas. They are incredibly bullet spongy, and they roam around in big old packs of various enemy types, looking for poor little agents such as yourself that can't play with his friends. Like any extraction shooter, it's punishing, but you know, one cannot let greed overtake their reach. As you die. If you die, you lose the loot that you picked up. You know, well, now you've lost it, and you can either try and go back or accept that you are bad. The Division's Dark Zone was one of the early adopters of the extraction shooter genre, where of course we had DayZ at the time. I think it was still sort of in its early stages, but Escape from Tarkov wasn't out yet, and this was the first time it was brought to a more mainstream AAA market. One of my friends, he's a real scumbag, played so much Dark Zone he never actually made it to the level 30 cap in like the other area. He just only played Dark Zone. And what I heard, it was very janky. It was a little janky at first due to like the several server issues and plenty of exploits. It was very inconsistent. My friend told me whenever he was in trouble, he would just glitch inside a wall to escape. Disgusting. Overall though, The Division still holds up to this day. Although some aspects of it are weak and feel a little underdeveloped, such as the endgame content and the bulletproof beanies, the setting, most of the gameplay, the customization, the loot mechanics, and not to mention the Dark Zone when it's not being horrible. It just all comes together to still make a good experience. Although it was clearly chasing trends at the time, it still managed to bring something unique to the table, which can't be said for everything in this genre. I enjoyed my time with it overall, and yes, there is some grinding at parts, but honestly, if the Ultimate Edition is on sale, and it usually is, it's a great game to pick up and play with some friends on the cheaper end. It's a game which warranted a sequel. You know, it was like a bundle of ideas smooshed together in sort of unequal parts. And thankfully it did get a sequel, but that's a tale for another time.
Hey! Shitface! Get down here! Cyclops got a message for you.
Tell your boss you can stick it.
That's for last week!
Naka!
Releasing in 2018, Assassin's Creed Odyssey was Ubisoft's second entry into the sprawling open-world RPG take on the struggling franchise. After the broken release of 2014's Assassin's Creed Unity and the middling reception to 2015's Assassin's Creed Syndicate, attitudes changed towards the franchise. There was an overwhelming sense of franchise fatigue which had been built up since Assassin's Creed 2 back in 2009. The franchise had been on a yearly release schedule like Call of Duty, and we know how that's going.
They're playing Fiend! COD is back!
The ability to speak does not make you intelligent.
But that only led to exacerbating the feeling of repetition of each release. However, Ubisoft just didn't really care unless the sales went down, which they did. So, taking a well-earned year-long break from the release schedule, Ubisoft cooked up a not-so-new formula to the franchise, taking influences from other games at the time, like the massively popular and successful Witcher 3 Wild Hunt.
Ever play Gwent?
As all great, creatively bankrupt studios do. Which then gave us Assassin's Creed Origins in 2017. A new take of the franchise featuring choice-driven gameplay, loot systems, and meaningful character progression. But Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a game I've attempted to play several times. I bought it about a year or so after it released, and I played it for like 10 hours, and then I just put it down. I can't actually remember why. I think it was just too much stuff. And then a few years later, I tried it again, and the same thing happened. I'm a big fan of the older generation of Assassin's Creed, mainly the Ezio trilogy.
Your sister seemed quite satisfied with the handling I gave her earlier.
For they're just the great story and satisfying gameplay, besides the flaws. You know, it's definitely got flaws, they're not perfect. But I just found Odyssey and its predecessor Origins, which I had a similar relationship with, to be such a departure from its roots that it just didn't feel like an Assassin's Creed game. So, revisiting this, I was curious to see what my reaction would be, and to see if I could look past my love of the previous games and open my mind to something new. Well, kind of new. Set during the Peloponnesian War, Odyssey follows either Cassandra, who I played as, or Alexios, a Spartan Misthios cast out as a child by their father, who is then hired by a mysterious figure to kill a Spartan general known as the Wolf. Embarking on a journey across Greece, Cassandra finds out that the Wolf is actually her father.
Didn't fall. You fucking threw me to my death!
Leading her through her own adventure, attempting to reunite her fractured family while trying to investigate the elusive Cult of the Cosmos, a secret society which are the puppet masters behind the war sweeping over the country. I was actually quite surprised that Odyssey's story is really quite good, you know, when it's actually progressing, that is. Cassandra she's a great protagonist, not someone I'd call three-dimensional, but as a sort of vessel for the player to sort of inject their own choices into her character, she serves well in that person. I maybe like akin her more to Shepard from Mass Effect.
You big stupid jellyfish.
Her facial expressions and just like overall animation alone is from memory better than some of the more recent Ubisoft games. Definitely better than Star Wars Outlaws, because some of those people looked like pieces of wood. She is cool enough to be convincing as like a child thrown down by the Spartans, hardened by a life of poverty and struggle.
This is touching, but you owe me drachmin.
Don't think I didn't notice you looting one of my chests.
Consider it a fee for your hubris, malaka.
But having this determination and willpower to settle political intrigue and kill bandits and then fight in wars. It's convincing. The story itself takes you all over Greece, which, surprise, surprise, looks incredible. Time and time again, Ubisoft just show, no matter the setting, they can craft just an absolutely beautiful open world map to explore, with plenty of outposts to raid, caves to explore, and treasure to find, and people to kill. The writers here also do one of my favourite things in sort of like any narrative, and that's tie the antagonist or the opposing force to the protagonist itself with like sort of like an emotional connection. Sure, a big bad villain you've never met is great when it's done well, there's plenty of them.
Hi.
But here, having your brother Alexios, well, spoilers by the way, be the leader of the Cult of the Cosmos grounds this massive open world adventure with more personal stakes, allowing for a decent exploration of Cassandra's character. You know, will she try to steer her brother away from the dark path as he leads the cult? Or will she believe he is too far gone, simply admitting the brother she once had is gone, replaced by an angry and tyrannical leader, hell-bent on making Greece suffer? You see, having that investment in the villain, that attachment in any story allows the player to feel more connected to the protagonist. And in a game like this, where you can make choices which lead to, you know, consequences, it allows you to feel more attached to a more personal story. Although the overall choices and direction you can take Cassandra is a little thin, it's very black and white, either being a real mean mercenary, you know, only accepting contracts for the coin regardless of your moral compass, or on the other hand, you don't accept the coin, and, you know, you do things that would be considered good deeds, you know, or not taking the coin away from people that need it more. So, kind of like the Witcher contracts, pretty much. But anyway, the directions are maybe one note, but they do allow you as the player to direct and roleplay as Cassandra in what way you wish, as long as it's those two ways. Although the narrative itself is interesting when there are actual interactions involving this family dynamic are great, the vast majority of this game is bogged down by its incessant need to drag everything out for as long as possible. The game is massive, for better or worse. On one hand, there is a lot of stuff to unpack from its main missions as well as its side content, but a lot of it just feels like padding. For example, I'll give you an example. On a lead for the search for Cassandra's mother, Cassandra is led to a pirate-controlled island as the leader could know what the location of her mother is. And at this point in the story, things are really starting to get going. You've just, in the previous mission, you've just handled some political intrigue in Athens to gain some trust of people who can give you leads. And now you've set out into the wide world to follow those leads. But upon meeting this leader, she then tells you she knows where your mother is. So you're like, oh great, I don't need to go to the other people. But then she locks it behind a 15,000 drachmae barrier, telling you to help out on the island before she will tell you. I genuinely let out the biggest sigh ever. This sort of thing happens constantly. Now, overall, the story is pretty great when it's actually being told, but sadly, just given the game's gigantic size and need to keep the player playing for as long as possible, drawing out these sequences and level gating certain areas just takes away from the experience and distracts you from the narrative. You know, it's potentially leading players to the store, which they could find plenty of remedies for these issues that Ubisoft created, as long as they are willing to take their wallet out. The gameplay is where Odyssey differs from the other entries in the franchise the most. Similar to Origins, well, pretty much the same as Origins, Odyssey is now a more combat-focused RPG, doing away with the more stealth and assassin fantasy-oriented missions of the older games, and focusing more on the combat and gearing systems. And overall, it's fine. You know, it does the job. The gearing system itself is fine. You know, finding different tiered items as you venture out, killing cultist members or mercenaries, or just clearing outposts. You find plenty of loot. There's plenty of shit to find dotted around the map. You can then outfit Cassandra with plenty of armor and several weapon archetypes to choose from, being, you know, the standard swords, blunt weapons, heavy weapons, and javelins. It's just nothing groundbreaking here, but it works well enough. It's always satisfying finding a new gear to mess around with, but it just feels very surface level for an RPG. Due to its transition to an RPG, there are certain expectations for the depth of the mechanics, you know, there being the dialogue choices, the playing the role, the different gear, skill trees, etc. But Odyssey just feels like a lesser version of the games which have done these mechanics way better. Stealth is here, but it's just not very encouraged. It's, at least that's what I thought anyway. It's fairly easy to get spotted, and if your spear doesn't do enough damage to one-hit an enemy, then you have no choice but to fight the old-fashioned way, leading to the combat itself, which, again, is just fine. It does feel a little weightless, if I had to complain, which I will, and I think that it can be attributed to its sound design, as well as the pointless damage numbers that are thrown at you. Weapons just don't feel like they have any weight to them. The sound when you make contact with an enemy is just so, I don't know, wet? It almost just feels like a placeholder, like something they had in there which they were then going to replace. And then the damage numbers just sort of mean nothing. I mean, oh yeah, wow, I'm doing 40,000 damage with this attack. But it doesn't feel like I'm doing 40,000 damage with this attack, because the enemy's health is still going down at the same rate as it was before. No faster, nor slower. It's a little thing, but for me to, in order to get properly immersed into a game, there has to be multiple levels of feedback, not just visually, but the audio design must coincide with the visuals in terms of quality, or it just sort of sticks out like a sore thumb, like it did here. Like your typical Ubisoft game, there is plenty of stuff to do, and given the map is bloody huge, you'll be doing a lot of the same stuff. You know, clearing outposts is fun, for the first few times until you realise it's pretty much the same thing over and over and over again, similarly with the war conquest mechanics. So throughout the game, the Spartans and the Athenians are at war, which makes for some pretty interesting story scenarios with the political intrigue and choosing which side you'll help. But in terms of gameplay variety, like with most things in this game, it just wears very thin very quickly. The factions have control of certain regions of the map, and you have to weaken their strength by, you know, clearing outposts, killing the regional leader, or destroying their supplies. You get the picture, you know, it's just the same sort of stuff you would do anyway. And once the region is weak enough, you then have a conquest battle, one last stand for the region's, you know, defender, where you fight in an open field and kill as many people and generals as possible to whittle down their strength until you win. And I mean, yeah, the first few times, it's pretty fun. There is a good level of spectacle fighting in a big open battle, which cannot be denied, you know, it's just you have to do so much. And with the unremarkable combat, these battles become more of a chore than a joy, leading to another part of this game becoming more stale to me. There is also ship combat, which is pretty fun, but it just cannot compare to Black Flag ship combat. That will never be topped. Thankfully, the map isn't as gross as it has been in previous games though. It's got a little compass in the top part of your map, similar to like some sort of Skyrim, I suppose, which allows you to discover locations as they are only marked with question marks this time around, encouraging you to explore rather than just run to the marker that you need to. As well as just not bloating the UI with useless collectibles like they seem to have such a boner for. As a fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise before this transition, as well as just RPGs being my main choice of game in general, Odyssey just feels like a lesser version of what it's trying to be, losing the identity of being an assassin fantasy in order to chase the trends of what games were doing well at the time. While playing, I found myself sort of thinking of better games that Odyssey is clearly inspired by, The Witcher 3. That's just amazing game. It's a perfectly fine game where you can lose plenty of hours if you so please, and people definitely did considering the sales, but to me, Odyssey fails in being an Assassin's Creed game, but if you remove that label, you have a pretty decent RPG, bogged down by a lot of unnecessary bloat, which in my opinion was only made to scale in order to push people towards the fucking cash shop. And yes, saving the best till last, the cash shop. And although it wasn't as bad as various other microtransactions in different Ubisoft games, it's just a little scummy, innit? People can buy anything from permanent 50% XP boosts for $10 to smooth out the grind artificially created by Ubisoft themselves. The coolest weapons, the coolest armor, the coolest mounts locked behind a paywall rather than being in a game which is, partly about outfitting your character to look cool. To me, it just comes across as Ubisoft creating a game to sell cosmetics, artificially making it fat, to then sell you something to make you thin. Given its bloat and length and grind, anything, it's just, they're creating, rather than creating a game for people to enjoy, they're just making it for people to spend money on. And sadly, this attitude just won't slow down for some time.
Freedom soon will come. Then will come from the shadow.
Following the decently well-received somewhat reboot of the Ghost Recon franchise in 2017, its predecessor Ghost Recon Wildlands was rather well liked by fans of the franchise, praised for its open-world sandbox approach to mission design, squad-based mechanics, vast open world to interact and do missions in, and even like an interesting setting not usually tackled by the franchise, going after the deadly cartels and the sicarios, with lots of tattoos rather than military corporations, people that like blowing stuff up, or naughty little nations. Similar to their approach with the Assassin's Creed franchise, Ubisoft wanted to change the formula and breathe new life into the franchise, and it worked well enough for Ghost Recon as well, for a time. Fans, including myself, were really looking forward to the next entry in this new pivot to an open world sandbox approach to Ghost Recon, instead of the more linear focus that they had before. I enjoyed Wildlands, but I didn't play it too much. I think I was still smoking the Destiny 2 joint a little too much at the time. But with the literal Punisher being spread all over the marketing, a return to tackling a more conventional, well-armed PMC organization, my body and mind were ready. But then it did this funny little thing, and it came out.
Making them all feel a little more padded, underwhelming, or contradicting than they really need to be. But fun can be salvaged if you focus on one or two of those and just limit your expectations.
Considering the microtransactions were so bad and excessive that they had to take some out late to put back in later, this is an easy 4 out of 10. And playing by yourself, even worse, 3! Do not waste your time with Breakpoint.
Having a game that you have progress when you can just buy all the fucking progress. Are you just saying don't even bother playing our fucking game? It's that bad. It's that bad. The whole point of the fucking game, the whole point, the fun, the actual whole fucking point of playing this game is to go out into the world, fight people, and get your reward for killing them. So why would you want to just miss all that and just go and buy it from the what kind of fucking moron buys this?
Ghost Recon Breakpoint had a very, very rough launch, with a beta leaving bad impressions on gamers. Only a few months out from launch, meaning that there isn't really enough time to fix any of the problems with the game that people would have then highlighted. You know, the betas that they do these days, unless they're like months and months and months before, they're just sort of like a form of marketing, okay? And that's what it basically was here as well. This is just, it's because it wasn't just simple bugs that would need to be fixed quickly with patches. The actual core mechanics of the game itself were just off. And we're getting ahead of ourselves. After a United States cargo ship is sunk near an island called Aurora, I can't actually remember how to say it, in the Pacific, Nomad and his team of ghosts are sent to investigate. Shortly after arriving, their helicopters are shot down by the owners of the island, Skye Technology, killing almost all of the ghosts in one swift drone strike. Nomad then discovers that the Punisher, who was a former ghost and was behind the attack, has now gone rogue. An angry and betrayed Nomad works with the local rebels and a resistance group, Skye Tech, to take back the island and kill the man he once thought was his brother. Honestly, the setup for this story is pretty great. It does feel quite video gamey, but it is video games, so what do you expect? But the idea of having an entire island overrun by maniac drones and a traitorous ghost agent leading a PMC group called the Wolves, fighting with the resistance on the island to free the island from their control, it's a great setup, I can't deny it. Jon Bernthal as Walker is pretty great. He's a pretty fascinating villain, I suppose, for lack of a better term. You find out through flashbacks and intel drip fed to you that Nomad and Walker used to be brothers in arms. Grounding the conflict in more than just kill this guy because he's bad, there's personal stake in this conflict, which, as I said, I like. It directly connects to the protagonist. Walker believes that the US government betrayed soldiers like him, treating them as expendable as he watches, not expendable 3, as he watches fellow soldiers die in pointless wars, not allowing them to do the jobs they need to do to bring those wars to a swifter end instead of sacrificing more men. So basically, the Punisher, in some respects. But then Walker is stationed on Aurora. I'm just going to say Aurora. There's not another R in there. Aurora. We'll try that. Aurora. Just sounds weird. Okay. He sees the Skye Tech drones as an opportunity to make a new type of army, one free of political corruption, believing his actions on Aurora as they are justified as he kills ghosts left and right as they are simply pawns of the government. This makes for it's an interesting enough villain, really. Played very well by Bernthal, as always. He manages to still let his mannerisms seep through as he really does wish to tell you something.
Let me tell you something.
Let me tell you something else, man. Tell you something, man.
Let me tell you something. They bound to get us off there, but let me tell you. Let me ask you something. Every time we have.
But that is where the positives end. Although the connection between Nomad and Walker make for good character interactions when they do happen, they are so few and far between. The game's narrative is stretched thinly over rather boring and repetitive missions, giving only the occasional bit of Bernthal when you are literally thirsting for it. You are told by various mission givers to go blow this up, rescue that guy, or go and hack that thing. You know, the overall formulaic structure of the objectives overshadows the character-driven storytelling, which I could sense here, you know, I could feel it. Similar to Odyssey, there is just too much stuff, and it's all the same, it's exhausting. However, that is just my opinion. Again, similar to Odyssey. Through my research, I've seen people really love this amount of content. You know, they're sinking hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours into doing all these side missions, all the side content. But for me, it really didn't grip me, like, at all. It felt like it was distracting from the main story, with pointless narrative, which honestly just feels like 100% filler. Although I can play games solely for the gameplay, I mean, I played Destiny for years, unfortunately, for a game that sets up an interesting morally grey character like Walker and then just barely uses him, instead just killing a bunch of boring drones and faceless wolves, it all just feels like wasted potential for what could have been a really great story. Now to the gameplay. You know, Ghost Recon's gameplay, it's good. It's right. Well, it's all right. Okay, if not a little rough around the edges to this day. It feels like it's at odds with itself, so to speak. A huge part of why this game had such a hostile initial reaction is the looter-shooter approach it took to the gearing system. Throughout the game, enemies drop loot, whether that be a new gun, piece of armor, consumable, or all of which have their own attributes and gear rating. Okay? For certain missions, you need to have a certain gear rating in order to not get two-shot, which I found that out the hard way a few times. It's not terrible, but it's not really great either. There are far better games with better loot systems, ones that I've even spoken about in this video, which just have so much more depth to it, you know. But the thing is, the worst thing about this is that it's clashing with the other mechanics and systems at play here. So Ghost Recon has, as a franchise, has always been about more tactical combat, more squad-based combat, nothing like Baldur's Gate 3.
Shot? Absolutely, we got this. Let's go, baby!
But it's more about surveying the area, finding targets, looking for an entry point, and moving in to complete your objective in a multitude of ways. It's a great loop that has always worked well in this franchise and has always kept me interested when I've dipped my toes in every now and then. But when you can't one-shot headshot a sniper because your sniper isn't of the same level as the AI, it directly conflicts with the tactical nature of the game. So now I would have to leave and do some more boring side content to find a better gun, you know, grinding to a higher level. Or you can just go in guns blazing, which to me, in this scenario, is just far less interesting. It honestly baffles me as to why Ubisoft thought this would be a good idea, and I know exactly why.
Money!
But it just doesn't improve the game's formula by any means, it just sort of muddies the experience. There is an overabundance of mechanics at play here. I remember when in my first few hours, I was kind of overwhelmed by all the shit that was on my screen. Most of it is pretty useless. For example, I'll give you an example. Ubisoft wanted to implement some more survival-based mechanics to this game, perhaps to lead in more to you being a survivor living off the land, you know, which on paper sounds great. That would be really cool. However, it's just not developed enough to feel necessary at all. It just feels more like bloat. If the player had to be mindful of their water intake, their hunger, temperature, etc., this all could have really added to the experience of managing all of these things, creating tension and small decisions to be made constantly when entering combat or traveling. But the thing is, you just don't need to engage with any of it. I did it once to get some footage, like set up camp, had some water, and then it gave me some like stamina regen or whatever. But it's not something that I noticed having a problem with anyway. Like, oh wow, I can now run for a little longer. Thank you, Ubisoft. There's also like an intel collection mechanic where you find pieces of intel across the island to then put it together and build information from that intel. And when I was first shown this, I was like, oh cool, I have to like read through the collected intel. It can be like video files, emails, that sort of thing, and then come to a conclusion about whatever it was I was trying to find out. But then I was like, oh, but what if I get it wrong? Does that lead to like a different mission? Or which obviously it wouldn't, that's like too dreamlike. Or do I just have to keep trying until I get it right? But it just tells you what it is. Again, this feels like such a cool missed opportunity. Imagine like dropping the looter shooter mechanics, going for that more tactical gameplay, which is here, you know, and where you really have to live off the land, manage health and resources before missions and during travel, finding intel across the island as you piece together the backstory of where everything went wrong here. To me, it feels like they were going for this in some way, and perhaps the developers themselves had that intention, but it's in direct conflict with the looter shooter systems they tried to shoehorn in. It's not all bad though, well, mostly it is, but there are still decent parts to this game. The actual shooting itself does feel good. You know, there are moments when all the systems are working together to make for some, you know, very satisfying moments when you're cleared through an enemy compound without anyone knowing, or just, you know, killing everyone and just being fun. You know, it's still fun. You will be doing that a lot though. I mean a lot. Like, all the missions are practically identical, as I said before. There isn't really a narrative through line to sort of push you through. I mean, there is, but it's just so thin and uninteresting. I don't know. You know, making the repetitive nature of the mission design even more glaring. But then again, the AI is terrible, like really terrible. It's not even like exploitable, as they are just like so inconsistent, either spotting you through walls or just ignoring you entirely, leading to some frustratingly unpredictable moments. But the gunsmith system is good. Being able to customize every attachment of your weapon is good. You know, it's standard. You know, it's nothing exceptional. But the island of Aroa, I've already forgotten how I said I was going to say it, is beautiful. What a surprise. The overall customization is pretty in-depth. There's plenty of clothes and items you can outfit yourself with. But the fact that it's all tied to a gear number just muddies it all. You're just sort of like constantly swapping out gear as soon as you pick it up. And it's not interesting gear really. You know, thankfully there is an appearance only button, otherwise you would look like a mishmash of colour and cloth like you did in Cyberpunk before they got that update. You know, there is plenty of variety across the island though, you know, from snowy mountains to deep jungles. There's definitely variety in its visual design, especially when being contrasted to the modern futuristic look of the Skeltec compounds, but honestly that's really it. Ubisoft knew that they cocked up here. There was a lengthy period of post-launch support in an attempt to try and fix a lot of the game's issues, even adding an entirely different mode of playing called immersive mode, which gives you the option of doing when you start the game, which removes the gearing system entirely and puts more of a focus on the survival mechanics. You know, almost like they should have done that in the first place. But I chose to go with the original system because I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. They also added AI teammates, which, you know, I didn't even know that they weren't in the game initially, because, you know, that's been in the series, you know, from the start. However, due to its late implementation, it just feels slightly underdeveloped. They did add the ability to customize your teammates later, but not initially. It's like all games that sort of have to go through this, like, oh, I'm terrible when I come out, but I promise I'll be good. You know, it's hard to praise Ubisoft for adding things to a game which should have been in there in the first place. You know, however, they didn't struggle to add an egregious monetization on day one. Similar to Odyssey, Breakpoint was yet another victim to Ubisoft's greed, clearly only implementing gearing systems so that they can not sell just cosmetic skins, but guns, blueprints, attachments, vehicles, skill points, crafting materials, time savers, you know, and everything in the game. Having this disgusting amount of microtransactions in a full-price game is frankly criminal. There is a comical amount to pay for, undermining the entire experience is you can simply just drop a bit more Wonga and have some of the best looking, best performing items in the game. Breakpoint was also a victim of Ubisoft's disgusting approach into the NFT craze, which is still funny to this day. However, thankfully, they didn't sell well at all, making only a reported $400 in sales revenue. The project was quietly dropped after only 3 months. Ubisoft's lack of direction and greed with Breakpoint was why it was destroyed. What is beneath all of this sewage is a potentially flawed but fun game, undermined by the gluttony and idiocy of the producers behind it. So talking about Rainbow Six Siege isn't going to be like the other games I've spoken about in this series, as it's mostly a multiplayer live service game with constant changes throughout the 10 years it's been out. Until a few years ago there was a mode called Terrorist Hunt, similar to how it was in Rainbow Six Vegas. You drop into a scenario, fend off waves of enemies, or move into the map planting bombs, securing objectives, or just kill everyone. There wasn't really a story. I believe there was a thin narrative in the Rainbow Six Siege one, from memory. They were more like training missions, I think. Oh yeah, no, and they had the Angela Bassett, the goat, guiding you through, which was good. I liked that.
No matter how or where our enemies strike, no matter what defense they cower behind, Team Rainbow must stand ready.
With the final mission taking place in like a university which had faced like a chemical attack. It was fun, but it was clear that was more of an onboarding or tutorial for what Rainbow Siege was really about, and that was shooting each other in the head.
Oh, get fucked! Frosty, you just saved my life.
So making its debut in 2015...
Say that again?
Rainbow Six Siege is a 5v5 competitive tactical shooter, where one team attacks and one team defends. Teams select from an array of operators which, have their unique abilities, such as Thermite, who can place down a thermite charge to punch through reinforced walls, or on the defender side you have someone like Mute, who can place down jammers which stop enemy drones in their tracks from scanning and gaining information of the defense setup, all in order to either plant a bomb, rescue a hostage, or secure an area. Now, I used to fucking love this game. I used to love Rainbow. I picked it up soon after its release when it was still a little broken. When the game came out, it had the classic Ubisoft downgrade touch. The E3 trailers boasted graphics and animations which truly looked incredible, especially with the lighting. I remember that being specifically a standout. But on release, the downgrade was undeniable. So there was already a good bit of controversy surrounding that, as it was not the first or even the last time that they do something like this. The game was riddled with bugs, bad hit registration, which was vital to a competitive shooter, not to mention constant server issues leading to disconnects and just lag in general. There were even complaints with the severe lack of content in the game, only releasing with 11 maps and 10 operators on each side. Although it kept players invested for a time, the lack of content led to players dropping off sooner than Ubisoft wanted. Rainbow Six adopted the seasonal model, having around 4 seasons a year, which at the time would introduce 2 new operators, one for each side, and their respective map. I remember being excited for these releases a lot. Having a new operator to play around with was always great. It added some freshness to the fairly stale pie. I played the game through most of its 4 or 5 so years in the beginning, dipping in every now and then, getting really into the tactical gameplay. The feeling of countering other operators and pulling off clutches was just so rewarding. It kept me invested even though the game was a little bit broken. In 2017 there was a massive content drought as Ubisoft launched Operation Health, a 3-month-long directive to fix the game's glaring issues, such as the hit registration, server issues, and just matchmaking in general. And although this part of the game was hard to slog through due to the lack of anything new, me and my friends, we still did, as we loved Rainbow. With all its imperfections, it was incredibly rewarding, unique, and fun shooter for its time. There really wasn't too much out there like it. As the years went on, my interest would wane. Things would pique my interest, such as the fascinating Operation Outbreak, a strictly PvE game mode, which was a sort of zombie survival mode like Left 4 Dead, and yeah, that was really fun. and others seem to really enjoy it as well. So naturally, Ubisoft thought that they would make an entire game around it, and yeah, that wasn't great. But aside from that, I just got tired. You know, I played the game for quite some time, and I started to find interest in other things. They still kept the seasonal model, releasing new operators or reworking them to be more viable as the meta progressed. Old maps were reworked in order to be more in line with the competitive landscape that the game was going for. Again, I tuned in every now and then, messed around with the new operators, played with some mates, but it just didn't grip me like it used to do. And, you know, the game went on. Playing Rainbow Six Siege in 2025 was an interesting experience of highs and lows. On one hand, it still feels like Siege, the core gameplay at least. The gunplay is sound, the variety in each map is there due to the design of the maps and the gadgets each operator has. It's still definitely fantastic when you do well.
Oh my god, that was kind of tense. Thankfully, the Traveler's Light is inside me.
And naturally, absolutely soul-crushing when you don't do so well.
Was it Ash who killed you?
I just got f***ed.
Okay, one's prone here.
Oh, behind! Fuck, man.
Like I said, I used to play a fair bit of Siege. I think I nearly reckon up maybe just under 1,000 hours over the course of the first few years. But I drifted towards other games as I slowly began to chase new experiences. And that's nothing against the game, however. I've always been like that. I always like to play a plethora of games, plethora of experiences. And some games do get their hooks in me, like Siege was definitely one of them. Going back, I had to accept I won't be anywhere near as good as I used to. You know, and also trying a game on PC for a little bit the first time, I really did feel like a fish out of water. I would panic in tense situations, you know. Teammate, I'm so sorry. Fumbling what should have been an easy 1v1 back from when Frosty Flynn was in his prime. Forgot the controls, you know, I forgot sight setups and my aim, holy f***, it was so bad. Even on PC it was bad.
How did I not kill him? Oh!
I had to accept that I was going to play badly, and when I did, I began to have a lot more fun, even managing to play well in some instances. But back to the gameplay, it's regularly expanded for better or worse. When they introduce new operators, and the fact that they are still introducing them 10 years later just astounds me. Not every operator is a hit, some of them are kind of useless, such as Sens, who is comically memed by the community. But there are some which really switch how you play things. My favourite new addition is probably Legion, being able to place small traps around the map, which then activate and give off like a sound cue, as well as slowly poisoning the attacking operator until they take the dart out of their leg, which then gives you an opportunity to swing in and feed them some lead. It's just, you know, it's just such a well-designed and fun operator kit. So not much has changed in its gameplay, thankfully. The gameplay was always what kept me coming back to Siege in those years. Just one more match sort of energy. The map updates to some of the more unbalanced ones are welcome, however I do kind of miss Old House and Cardboard Box Favela, where the destruction was just absolutely ridiculous. The maps do feel a little over-designed now in a way, if I, you know, feeling more like a competitive shooter than an actual scenario. In addition to the new operators which aren't locked behind a paywall, which, you know, for Ubisoft is pretty pro-consumer, there's always plenty of balancing patches for when they don't get things right, and, you know, the new additions always keeps things fresh. But where I do draw concerns towards is to Siege's identity and its monetization practices. When Siege was announced and released, Siege was marketed towards fans of the franchise, you know, fans who preferred the more realistic, slow and methodical approach towards gameplay. You know, grounding it in a counter-terrorism fantasy, leaning it into what, you know, the first operators being from their own respective special forces. You know, you had Ash, who had a projectile breaching round, and castle who can reinforce doors and windows with stronger barricades, you know, both helming from the FBI. And then you would have, you know, Thatcher, who can destroy enemy electronics with an EMP grenade. And Mute, who can place jammers which stop drones and other attacking electronics, you know, both from the SAS. You know, the color scheme and presentation of the showcases led gamers and myself to believe that this is what the direction it was going to go in. You know, realistic, slow-paced, visceral gameplay where sort of every shot matters kind of thing. Even like the intro videos you'd get when unlocking a new operator were quite dark in tone and, you know, very stylistic. They were some of them were iconic.
Unmanned drones, fucking laser sights.
And that, to me at least, is the Rainbow Six identity. However, as the years have gone on, Ubisoft introduced increasingly outlandish and fantastical operators with sci-fi-like gadgets. I remember when they specifically introduced an operator called Ayana, an operator which can make a hologram of herself in order to fool the defenders and gather intelligence on their positions. It's a cool operator, it's designed well, but introducing these kinds of operators just sort of changes the game's identity, moving away from what the franchise is about, or what it was about, to something more akin to Overwatch with destructible walls. It is abundantly clear that Ubisoft wanted to try and appeal to a mass market as the years went on. Tactical shooters do have a player base, but they're much more niche. And there is much more opportunity in different genres and presentation. This changed in the game modes they began adding as well. You know, stuff like Team Deathmatch, Golden Gun, and the infamous Rainbow is Magic. Events were a clear pivot towards trying to appeal to that market. Although opening itself up to new players, it then cuts off those who stuck with the game during its earlier years when it was struggling. Even things like the balance philosophy, which I mentioned briefly, changed drastically. The game was initially built around the realism, a tactical depth of a counter-terrorist shooter. You know, maps which may not have had balance, like House, to like now it's like giant labs and mansions, which I struggle to figure out where the fuck I am. Although the older maps were unbalanced, they'd sort of like leaning to either an attacking side or like a defender side advantage. They felt grounded, which complemented the tone of the game. But the overbalancing of maps continued to take away from that until now their previous strategy, their previous philosophy is muddied by a desperate attempt to appeal to esports. Moving on to the monetization, which mind you is nowhere near as bad as the other games I've spoken about in this video. But once again, muddied the identity to just appeal to a wider audience, but it's just to make a shitload of money along the way. The operator and gun skins themselves were always semi-grounded. There were some flashy ones like the sought-after Black Ice, but they weren't too ridiculous to completely like rip you out of the experience. They were more in line with the old-school Call of Duty sort of skins in that respect. But as the years have gone on, the skins and operators have become increasingly insane. It started off with the elite skins. I think I remember those. They were like versions of operators with like a sort of like a unique twist. I think they had like World War II variations of them. I remember Sledge's skin specifically being funny to see. He had like a red beret and a big mace instead of his hammer. Again, these skins did stick out, but they weren't too crazy. They were also 15 quid a pop, so a lot of people who bought them would get vote kicked.
I love democracy.
But now we have Master Chief as Sledge, WWE stars, and 2B from Nier Automata, you know, plaguing the game, completely ripping me out of the experience. So I saw there's even a skin for Valkyrie which is above £30. Like, what? Why? Not to mention that, you know, they had to integrate a battle pass because obviously it was following the trends. Cheers, Fortnite. Which, by the way, the skins on that are dreadful. They're not even like an immersion breaking way. I mean, they're awful in that way, but they just look bad. Although there have been some fantastic changes, like quality of life changes to Siege over the years, you know, introducing mechanics to help with the balancing, like the ban mode before each round where teams can ban the operators, which were in the final kill cam, so it doesn't really work very well. Or just like the unranked game mode, so players can get used to the ranked rule set and map rotations without wanting to kill themselves when playing ranked. But the game has changed too much that it has, to me at least, it's lost its identity. Ubisoft was sort of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation due to the not mass appeal of tactical shooter genre leading to not progressing the player count in as much as they want, or moving more to the mainstream trends, progressing the player count, making plenty of money, which we know they like doing, but then betraying those who stuck with the game through its tough years. Although it may be a fun hero shooter, sometimes I long for the semi-broken launch state, which was more in line with the franchise's roots, rather than chasing trends and becoming just yet another game which sold itself for the promise of money. 2015 to 2020 were definitely interesting years in our journey through Ubisoft's history, with some good, some bad, and plenty of ugly. To me, these years show me that Ubisoft, they can still make great games. We know they can make stuff. However, just like the industry in general, they pivoted towards chasing trends like live service and constructing experiences with the intent of poking your wallet, rather than making games for people to enjoy, play, and then eventually put down. These years in general are where we saw some radical changes in how games were developed, as studios just saw how much they could push gamers until they cracked. With the loot box scandal with Star Wars Battlefront 2 basically dooming the game, as well as Middle-earth Shadow of War having loot box mechanics in a single-player game, these years are when we saw a lot of the greed from studios develop, and sadly Ubisoft are by no means innocent in all of this. Ubisoft know how to make games. They can make good things when they try, which makes them such a frustrating studio. But the greed and lust for money continues to destroy and ruin any goodwill the studio had leading into the next decade. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, then you're a stud. Yeah, so this was quite like the games that I played for this one, they were quite long. So sorry this one took quite a while to come out. But I wanted to just get, it's more about getting the gist of the games. I wanted to like really understand what they are, you know, the story, just anything. I want to understand the mechanics, so it's not as easy as just sort of like playing it for like 20 minutes and then be like, oh yeah, I get the gist now. But yeah, some of these games were quite hard to play, but Rainbow, I'm probably still going to be playing Rainbow for a little bit. Unfortunately, it's got its hooks at me again for a little bit. But yeah, just wanted to say a massive thank you for watching, supporting. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments about any of these games, especially Rainbow. I'd love to hear what you guys also think about the identity, if it even matters to you, because I was speaking to some of my other friends and they said they don't even give a shit about it. So, you know, people have different opinions, so it's always interesting to hear them. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for watching. Cheers for now.